Hey guys, what is up? Public here back with another video, and today we're talking about Shadow Priest in the kind of preseason of Season 2 of The War Within. So the reason why it's doing a preseason video is today I want to go over, what has exactly changed going into this kind of week we get before the season actually starts. Shadow did get some baseline changes to it that will have, implications for our talent builds and what you're going to do to play this week. I'm also going to preview a little bit of what things look like going into the start of Season 2. We're kind of solidifying a lot of stuff still. As of now, when this video is being put out, Icy Veins should be fully updated for the launch of this season. I'm going to let things stabilize a little bit. If you want the most up-to-date information, check out the written guide. And then hopefully once things kind of fully launch, I'll have a new video to come out afterwards. So today, just kind of previewing a lot of stuff and just making sure you're okay if you want to play Shadow this week, to make sure you're doing everything that you can. Talk about a little bit of like what rotation changes and go over talent builds as well. Okay, so let's dive in. Okay, as I already mentioned in the video that came out a couple days ago, Shadow really didn't get many changes. Of course, literally like a couple hours after I posted that video, we did get some changes. Now, these changes are pretty light in terms of what they're going to impact rotationally. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's a couple of those, but they are somewhat heavy-handed, right? And this was done for a good reason. So when it comes to logging in on the day of the patch, obviously Season 2 has not started yet. So we have a week until the season actually starts. So you can't really gather any new gear or anything else like that. Mythic Plus will not have started the new season yet. So you're really just kind of in this preseason mode. You're farming reputations, that kind of stuff, doing the campaign with the new zone, all that good stuff. But these changes are still applied, right? So we're going to get these changes immediately. So what does that mean for us? It's basically just this. All of our damage is increased by 13%. This is huge, right? This is, for us right now, this is a great buff going into progression. And we'll talk about why they did this in a second. And then they also buffed Void Weaver. They had a couple specific things they buffed, which was Void Blast by 25%. This is massive. Collapsing Void by 15%. This is when the Entropic Rift finishes, it does that collapsing Void damage. So that was buffed. And they also buffed Inner Quietus, which is damage of Shadow or Pain and Vampiric Touch, went from 25% to 35%. So these actual changes were not fully posted on the PTR. This one did go in there, but these guys did not. So if you were seeing anyone testing, they did not have these active. The other thing to mention about this, that a couple things that aren't super clear about this 13% as of right now only applies to our non-pet spells. So what this basically means from like a build perspective, anything with Bender, Inescapable Torment, all that stuff is just gone. This has happened a couple times now where they just decided not to buff the pet side of this. So just so you know, this only included like our spells itself. I don't know if that was intended or not. That's just kind of how things have folded out. Maybe they change that in the future. If it's a bug or not, who knows? They didn't really tell us. The other thing that I'll say here is with the Inner Quietus change. So if you guys have been playing any amount of Void Weaver in Season 1, you've probably been experimenting a little bit with Unfurling Darkness. This is the talent that when you cast Vampiric Touch, you get to cast it again without a cast time, and it does like a bit of initial damage. With the way that Unfurling Darkness is tuned, it actually gets its coefficient from Vampiric Touch's damage. What this means is this also buffs Unfurling Darkness because of this change. So Void Weaver was already playing Unfurling Darkness for most things because of this talent, and now it's just made even better. So another big thing to note here. The other thing that's in kind of an earlier note, I'm not quite sure where they mentioned it, but that is the Twins of the Sun Priestess change. So let me go ahead and pull up one of our talent builds for this season so I can show what I'm talking about. So there is this talent called Twins of the Sun Priestess in our class tree, which says when you cast Power Infusion on someone else, you also get it. They added a little bit of this inside of 11.1, which is now if no ally is targeted by that Power Infusion, you'll cast it on a nearby ally and it prefers DPS dealers. So just a nice quality of life thing. I'm sure it's happened to me a couple times where the person I'm PIing is like out of line of sight or something, or I forget to update my macro. This just makes sure your raid is always getting, or your group is always getting that benefit on someone, which is good. So that's a nice quality of life change we got in this patch as well. So other than that, though, that's all we have in this new patch, right? So that's all the changes that we actually have. definitely not that crazy. Now, the reason why they made this kind of all damage increased and the Void Weaver targeted changes was because they also nerfed our upcoming tier set. Our upcoming tier set was really strong. It was in like the 30% range. Now it's down to like 12% or 10% depending on the build. So this is basically compensating for that upcoming nerf. But the kind of nice part is it makes us more consistent and more of that damage is on our base kit rather than relying on random procs from a tier set, which is a good thing. And we get this buff now, right? So we're kind of raking in the benefit of an upcoming tier set that would have been too powerful to help with like a balancing decision going forward. So what this means though for progression, especially early before you actually get access to your new tier, is that Void Weaver is definitely back on the menu. I know there was a couple, I made a call on it. A few other people have talked about, Archon being like the default choice. They clearly saw that and they wanted to change it. That's why they made these changes. So let's talk about builds and kind of what this means implication-wise for Shadow going into this kind of preseason bit here. So I'll start off just talking about Season 1 gear. So the reason why I want to break this up is the tier set does change this math a little bit, especially with the different builds that we're going to play. So for this week, if you're going to play Void Weaver, go ahead and swap to the new builds. Okay, you can go ahead and do this right now. These will be the same builds regardless of your tier. If you have old tier, if you have no tier at all, or once you get the new tier, you're going to play the same builds as Void Weaver. Doesn't change what you can do. You have a bit more options right now with Void Weaver, and I'll kind of show the two options real quick. Basically, there's a build with Mind Flay and Mind's Eye, and then there's a build with Destroyed Reality and Mind Spike. The Destroyed Reality Mind Spike build becomes about 3% better than Mind Flay once you get new tier. Right now, without the new tier, it's pretty even to Mind Flay and Mind's Eye. It's like within 1%. So right now, you do kind of have a choice. If you still want to keep playing Mind Flay and Mind's Eye, go for it. The reason why this is still able to kind of be viable is our existing tier set adds that extra second to Devouring Plague, which makes Mind's Eye Devouring Plagues not crap to play as a Void Weaver. We just really like that extra... Void Weaver likes that extra duration that we get from Destroyed Reality, even though it slows down the spec a little bit. So it's up to you. If I were you, I would kind of suggest playing the Mind Spike Destroyed Reality version just to get a feel for how this will play, because once you get new tier, basically this becomes the build to use, unless you want to take that 3-4% DPS loss in single target or with the Crash variant. Otherwise, this build should look pretty identical to what you're used to. It's still taking Unfurling Darkness. It's only using the Idol of Cthulhu as your single idol. The other change that we made here is we swapped from Void Empowerment to Darkening Horizon, which basically means we lose that free Devouring Plague at the start of the Rift, and we moved it to a longer Rift itself. The reason why we did this is with the changes mentioned here, you notice they did not buff Entropic Rift itself, which is really important because this is another modifier that Void Weaver has. They buffed Void Blast and Collapsing Void, right? So we're kind of indexing around this, and because of this change, the build is more focused around your Void Blast damage. So this is where, we care about extending the Rift to get that extra Void Blast out more consistently than we were before, and also making sure we have good, Devouring Plague uptime to make sure that happens. So that's the kind of big change with Void Weaver here. Mind Spike makes this even better because you can factor in Mind Melt, which gives you that extra crit on Mind Blasts and therefore Void Blasts. It's not too much different to play with this. You do want to make sure and be extra cautious to not, fully deplete your Mind Blast charges before casting Void Torrent. You want about like a 2 to 3 second buffer there to make sure you're not doing Mind Blast right into Void Torrent. And then the other thing with Mind Spike, it's usually good, now that we're using Darkening Horizon, you have a bit more time within your Rift window, you can weave in Mind Spikes in between your Void Blasts, where it makes sense, right? If you're capped on Void Blast charges, obviously you want to use that charge, but you can do like Void Blast, Mind Spike, Void Blast, just to kind of weave in a little bit there, just to get that extra crit amp. You don't have to think about it too hard. It's just one little minor optimization you can make if you're trying to min-max what Void Weaver looks like. Okay, and the other build that I'll talk about from a Void Weaver perspective, and then we'll show Archon, you of course have the Shadow Crash variant. So with this, we're just removing a couple points in the tree just to pick up Shadow Crash. Otherwise, everything else stays the same, right? So it's pretty straightforward. I'll show you what kind of the before and after, right? So before Spike, or before Shadow Crash Star, we have these 2 points in Phantasmal Pathogen, and then we just remove those 2 to pick up Shadow Crash. Easy as it is. You could also do Void Touch instead if you wanted to keep Phantasmal, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't change what you're playing. So yeah, so these will be the kind of builds you're going to use the most going into the new tier, and you can start using them right now. Okay, so switching gears, talking about Archon. So Archon is going to have a bit more of a change up depending on your tier situation. So going into preseason, right, with season 1 tier, you want to keep using the same Archon builds that you have been using, right? Whether it's single target with Crash, or Mythic Plus, right? Keep using all the same Archon builds. It's all going to be exactly the same. I'll cover these first, and we'll talk about Mythic Plus here in a second, right? So the same old Archon build and single target is still what you're going to play. There's no change here. Shadow Crash build, this is slightly adjusted. You can still play the old one if you want. Like I mentioned earlier, because of the baseline buff, we just took out the Mindbender. I think some builds had Inescapable Torment. We just moved those points around. It's really kind of minor, but that's what you want. So yeah, these builds more or less unchanged, and you want to keep using these until you get the new tier. Once we get access to new tier, then Archon switches builds to use Tormented Spirits and Idol of Yogg-Saron basically everywhere. But until you get the new 4-piece, doing that doesn't really make sense. So that's just kind of general advice when we're in preseason. Now, speaking of tier, the tier is actually, like I said, it's about 10 to 12%. It's definitely something you want to acquire. Early sins are showing that we want to go ahead and use it as soon as you get it, right? Even at like base item level from normal and that kind of thing, immediately swap from current 4-piece to 2-piece plus 2-piece. Do that as soon as you can, and then same thing, swap to the new 4-piece as soon as you can. Right now, it's looking like we're going to drop the leg slot as the preferred option, but you can also drop gloves if you want as well. Both are going to be just fine. I will plan on making a video next week, hopefully, talking a bit more in depth about these gearing choices. Just wanted to kind of preview what that will look like, okay? Let's see. Other things that we want to talk about is for Mythic Plus builds. So there is a new Void Weaver Mythic Plus build. It's pretty similar to what we already had, although it is kind of leaning... Again, we're playing Darkening Horizon again. There's Mind Spike, Destroyed Reality. And I'm going to really suggest that people use Unfurling Darkness more now than ever. It's just a very significant talent point now for Void Weaver, especially in lower key environments, especially in single target. So I would suggest taking this. Before it was more a bit optional where you could like use it or a point in like Maddening Touch for more AoE. Technically, you still could do that because obviously Unfurling isn't doing like Psychic Link cleave damage, but it's even great priority target when you're in AoE. So I think it's still a great pickup to use. And then, of course, the Archon builds have not changed. You still have the choice between the kind of hybrid 2-idol build or the triple idol build with Archon, okay? Now, these builds also are not going to change too much when we get new tier, right? So Void Weaver is going to use this same build once you get access to new tier. Archon, the only change is the hybrid build kind of falls out of relevancy, and you pretty much, if you play Archon on Mythic Plus, you play the triple idol build, which is basically what we have here. There, of course, is some options if you want to play Maddening Touch for more AoE or Mind Devour for more single target, whatever. But for the most part, build is going to look identical to what we were already running if you're playing Archon. Now, as far as like when to pick each talent, currently in preseason, go nuts, have fun, right? Like it's going to be pretty similar to what we have. The kind of viability of this stuff isn't going to change inside Mythic Plus. Void Weaver is still going to do better at kind of lower keys or like your weekly keys. As you start like chaining packs together or things are living long enough for a whole Void form in a single pack, Archon's just going to start blowing out Void Weaver. So where that happens is going to be up to you and your group. If everyone's like fully geared right now in season 1, that's like a 14 or 15 key. So below that, Void Weaver is probably going to be better, especially if you're just doing like one pack at a time type stuff. But play around with it. They both should be considered viable for like 98% of all keys being run. So take that for what it is, okay? Okay, so that's all I really have to talk about in this video. I'll link some of these resources in the description if you haven't seen them. And like I said, the Icy Veins guide should be fully updated by the time you're watching this video. Members, if you're watching a little bit early than other folks, because I uploaded the day before, it might still be rolling out, but should still be coming up ASAP. Keep your eye out on that for any changes. The change log I try to keep really updated. And again, we're going to keep simming. We're going to keep testing things once things come live. So be on the lookout for those things and be on the lookout for more videos once things stabilize. It's my goal to I really want to cater to what you guys are kind of looking for in these kind of updates. So again, planning on doing a similar video to this, but for the launch of season 2 officially. Let me know what you would like to see from that. If there's something you specifically want covered, a lot of it's going to be the same as what we just talked about, but more emphasis on gearing. So that's kind of my goal. Otherwise, that's all we have for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.